Well, hey, friends, welcome to this interview. I am glad to introduce today William Leung, who is the youth pastor at Scarborough Chinese Baptist Church. How you doing, William?
Good, good. Hello, everyone who may be watching.
And so, over
Yeah.
the next few moments, we're gonna talk through some of the things that William's been learning, experiencing, maybe some thoughts that may even be able to help you. And so, I think one of the first things I've been asking people over some of these is, with your youth right now, as because this has been happening since March break, really. Since March break, what kind of changes have you seen in them so far?
Hmm. Yeah. That's definitely a good question. Definitely something that's on all of our minds as we continue to think about
Hmm.
how we're doing youth ministry. I think that in many aspects, a lot of them have much more free time. One thing, at least for the youth at SCBC, that they had been kind of dealing with before March break or even before this whole thing started was that they were always very busy. They had a lot of things that are going on, whether it's extracurricular activities, things involving schoolwork, exams, school projects, and things like that. There was just a lot of stuff that they had on their plates, in addition to youth ministry, participating in youth group, and any kind of activity related to youth. But it seems like since this whole situation has kind of started, a lot of them do have a much more free time. We'll ask them, "Hey, so what have you been doing? Have you been really busy with school?" And they're, "Oh, no, not really." So related to that, we've had some of our counselors actually have meetings outside of our regular Friday night youth group meetings.
Hmm.
So it seems like they have the time and the capacity now to kind of engage in different types of activities or even meetings outside of our normally scheduled things. So that's definitely one thing that we've noticed in terms of the change. That in many aspects they do have a little bit more freedom in terms of time and their capacity, because a lot of their activities are no longer happening. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I think in
So,
terms of for them. Yeah.
okay. So how have you seen then, or have you noticed changes in their priorities then, in terms of what they're willing to get into, maybe what they're still not willing to get involved with?
Yeah, in terms of priorities or things that they're focused on, I think when we meet up for our regular Friday night meetings, at least, or even in terms of whether or not some of them would engage in these separate meetings outside of the Friday night scheduled meetings. There is a desire to just come together and to spend time with each other. Not that they
Hmm.
didn't have that before, but now that we've moved everything online, there is still this desire for connection.
Hmm.
I've seen posts from some other youth pastors and some of the other pages I'm a member of on Facebook, and a lot of them are saying, "Oh, how do we get our youth to want to engage?" Right? And I feel like one thing that this whole lockdown situation has revealed is that they haven't lost that.
Hmm.
So I would say in terms of that, there isn't a change. Although for some of them, um, we have noticed that they aren't signing up, and that's something that we've been thinking about as well. So there's one group who is still consistent. They were consistent on Friday nights. They're still consistent. We have one group who maybe were kind of consistent on Friday nights when we're still physically meeting, and now we're not seeing them as much. Same goes for Sunday school. We have at least one Sunday school class who's still meeting on Sundays, and um, a large chunk of the group, the class who used to be pretty consistent on Sunday, are not signing on on Sundays.
Hmm.
So in terms of the question, how have their priorities changed? Is there any kind of change in the things that they're focusing on? That's something we're continuing to unpack. So for some of them, it seems like maybe there hasn't been a change. Previously, they're coming on Friday nights. We still want to come. We still want to engage. And for others, we're still trying to kind of figure that out. We're trying to reach out to them and say, "Hey, we haven't seen you the past few Fridays. On Sundays, is there something that you really want to talk about? We don't have to stick to what we've been studying in curriculum and things like that, and they're still not really engaging. So I think that's something that we're still trying to unpack in terms of uh, that change in that presence.
Hmm.
Maybe previously it was, well, we're physically here with our family, so we might as well. But now it's not that they have a choice. Some of them are choosing or opting not to sign on. But we're still trying to unpack that.
Yeah.
So for some of them, it seems like it hasn't changed, and for some of them, it definitely has. So I think there's a little bit of both.
Okay. And so, I mean, all through this, I mean, how have you found your time shifting in terms of responsibilities? What kind of things are you finding yourself doing more of, or maybe less of, or maybe completely different?
Yeah, I think it's interestingly on the surface, I don't feel like in terms of things related to youth ministry, it doesn't feel like all that much has changed.
Hmm.
We're still I still message with my team of counselors and the student leaders kind of every now and then. I message them individually just to check in on them. That's something that I was doing before this whole lockdown situation anyway. And our team, they try to stay connected with the youth uh, through chat groups and things like that. We're still meeting on Friday nights, so there are a lot of things in terms of just our engagement and how we connect. I feel like that hasn't changed. I'm still prepping for Friday nights in terms of whether or not we have Bible study or discussion, and I'm still chatting with the team before Friday nights. Hey, this is what's going to happen. Here are some things that we can do. What do you think we can do? So in a lot of ways, I feel like things haven't changed for me in my role as
Hmm.
youth pastor. But one thing I think it has that has changed is trying to come up with different ways of engaging with all the youth. Like I mentioned, there are some who have opted not to join our Friday night meetings or even the Sunday school meeting we have. What are some ways we can connect with them? Why aren't they? Why are they opting not to sign on when they used to physically come to our gatherings, right? So I think that's probably one of the shifts, one of the things that we're thinking more of. Not that we weren't thinking of those who weren't showing up consistently before, but now we're thinking of them just a bit more. At least from my vantage point, I feel like, oh, hey, it's easy for you guys just to sign on. Is there something keeping you from signing on now? What is like you mentioned? What is the focus, or what is the lack of desire for you to sign in now? Even though it seems like it is easier in many regards. So yeah, in terms of what I do, my schedule and daily rhythms and things like that, I think the biggest challenge has been just adjusting to working from home, and kind of adjusting to establishing new work and life rhythms, being home with two young boys. But other than that, in terms of ministry, I think that youth ministry specifically, I feel like it's still kind of going, and there hasn't been that much of disruption. Um, Maybe extra things or extra meetings related to other responsibilities within the church, that has kind of changed a little bit. But in terms of youth ministry, I personally don't feel like there has been that big of a change. I could be wrong,
Hmm.
but I don't feel like there's been that big of a change, at least for me personally. Of
Okay.
course, that could be fatigue setting in, and it all just seems the same to me. But yeah,
So going forward, what are things that you're, whether it's through experimentation or maybe through trial and error, what are things that you're learning now that you think might be applicable over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months?
sure. I think that um, ho- learning how to leverage the ability to connect and communicate online.
Hmm.
How can we kind of leverage and maximize those opportunities? Um, yeah, and I think part of the reason why, at least for me, I feel like there hasn't been that drastic of a change to our youth ministry is because of the fact that we are still able to connect online, even on a Friday night. We'll get a fairly large group. Um, I think last Friday night total was about 40, 45.
Hmm.
So youth counselors and youth together. So it's still a pretty sizable group, and in that way, that's why it kind of feels like we're still kind of doing what we're doing. So I think that with this lockdown situation and the fact that a lot of things that we're doing previously in person, face to face, now that's all happening online. How do we leverage that? That previously it was, oh, we need to figure out times when everyone can physically get together, but with all of these online platforms, how can we think of ways to kind of continue to connect more often? Maybe it's not this doesn't have to be this large gathering where everyone gets together, right? It could happen more often during the week, smaller meetings, smaller groups. How can we do that? Since it means that people don't have to travel, people don't have to work the schedules around how do they get to a certain place, and whether or not they can physically be at a place. Now it's as simple as I've got a block of time, I've just finished my dinner, finished my work, I can just sign on and connect with people. So I think it presents a lot of interesting opportunities
Hmm.
in terms of how can we leverage this now, where we can create more opportunities to connect. There, as I'm thinking about doing things online and all that, one thing that a lot of our youth love to do with the counselors actually is they play games online. Um, so after the Bible study discussion, and they're still on and they're still playing games with each other. They're still in the breakout rooms in Zoom, but they're just playing a game together, whatever it is. Right. So is there a way for us to leverage that as an opportunity that during the week they just meet up and connect and play games that way and kind of continue to use those opportunities to build relationships.
Hmm.
And I've been thinking of different ways to do role playing games, and there's all these online platforms where you can kind of just all sign on and play games together. What if we could use things like that and use those as even opportunities to draw people in to youth group or youth ministry, draw people into the church community and say, hey, I'm starting this game online. Would you like to play? I've been seeing a lot of posts for role playing games, especially where people want to join these games. They're looking
Hmm.
for this connection. Can we leverage that? Can we say, hey, um, we're at Scarborough Chinese Baptist Church. We're the youth ministry. We run this thing once a week or whatever it is. Just sign on and play with us, and
Hmm.
use that and leverage that as an opportunity to begin to connect with people in the community, right?
Yeah.
And draw them into the community of believers. So I think moving forward, it's kind of seeing how we can use some of the tools and the things that we've learned in terms of how we can connect with each other in different ways.
Hmm.
And also, perhaps this is an opportunity for us to not go back to some of the things that we thought were important. Um, some of the busyness, some of the things where we're thinking, oh, programming, events, details, and things like that, things that kind of kept us busy. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but um, can't really come up with a specific example right now. But I'm just thinking in general, just ministry in general. What are some of the things that perhaps we were a little bit comfortable with in terms of just being immersed in
Hmm.
terms of doing, in terms of tasks, getting things done, schedules, and things like that. Now that all that's kind of all been removed, uh, can we arrive at a point where we say, once this lockdown is lifted, here are some of the things that we should keep, and here are some of the things that, you know what, we didn't have it during the lockdown. It was fine. Let's not go back to
Hmm.
that. So at least for me, I've been kind of thinking in terms of youth ministry, were there things like that where um, there were things that we kind of kept doing, there were things that kept us busy, but at the same time, with this new situation, are there things that we're not doing now because we can't physically do it, that hey, maybe we don't need this anymore, and we kind of focus on connections and focus on building these relationships. And then through that, how can we leverage those connections as opportunities to teach the gospel, to dive into scripture, to pray together, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Something you touched on that I think might be a very pragmatic question. You were mentioning before that you're dealing with, groups of 45. How do you, I mean, on Zoom, how do you manage all that?
Yeah, so in that regard, I guess, going back to the question, how has ministry changed for you? I guess in that regard, that is somewhat of a change. Previously, we used to come together, and there would be group worship and then a group icebreaker. So there would be group time, the large group time, and then we break up into small group time. But considering that we're still getting a sizable number on Friday nights, we've begun to focus a little bit more on the small group times. So when we
Mm,
come together, we have a time where we're just kind of all together in the room. Sometimes we'll have worship. Sometimes we'll just have the icebreaker. Sometimes we'll just, but most nights we'll start with that prayer. Sometimes I will do devotional, but it's less about that time that we're all together now, but more about the time where they're in their individual small groups.
mm.
So there's only a brief period where we're all together on the screen. I mean, it's kind of a mess anyway. It's a fun mess, but so this past week we celebrated birthdays. We had someone play Happy Birthday, and we had everyone sing, and it was a wonderful mess. Um, yeah, but we spend more time with the small groups in the breakout rooms.
Mm.
So as people are signing on, I start assigning them into their individual small groups. So each small group is a breakout room, and then we click open rooms, and then they just go into their rooms. So within their rooms, they'll have their own icebreaker. They'll be doing the Bible study discussion. I might prompt the small group discussion leaders on Facebook Messenger. I'll say, hey, so if you haven't gone to this, this is what you can talk about now.
Mm.
Or they might be taking the discussion in a way where they feel like it's most engaging for their group. So they're welcome to do that. I'm just kind of on the outside. I float around, and I'll just kind of join each breakout room, and I'll just rotate. Right? So I'll go in there, see what's going on, see what they're talking about, and I'll leave. I'll join the next group. So we do have 4 small groups. So I kind of throughout the night cycle through the 4 rooms until we end. So one thing that did come up this past Friday was that we had the 4 breakout rooms, one for each small group. One of the small groups wanted to break it up even further into kind of prayer groups. And for Zoom, you can't do that. You can't break up a breakout room into smaller rooms.
Mm.
So looking ahead to this Friday, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the 4 rooms for the 4 small groups, and then create a bunch of empty rooms so that, and hopefully that works, create a bunch of empty rooms so that any small group who wants to break it up even further, I can just begin to reassign them into the smaller rooms.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's interesting what kind of comes up um, in terms of logistics, in terms of how you use some of these platforms. But
Yeah.
yeah, so just to, I guess, answer the question, it becomes more about focusing on the small groups, and focusing on the individual groups, the counselors, and the youth within those groups, and the connection in the large group time. It's a little bit more surface level. It's a little bit more brief,
Mm.
just to give the small groups a little bit more time to connect within their groups.
Yeah. Cool. As we're wrapping up our time online here, to our friends who are listening or watching right now, what would be a word of encouragement you would give to them?
Word of encouragement is God continues to work
Mm.
in spite of us, especially as we're doing a lot of things online. There will always be technical difficulties. There will always be issues with sound and video, people not being able to connect, your internet dropping out because someone else is using it in your house, or whatever it is. Just be encouraged that God continues to work in spite of us. That not to focus on the things that aren't important. I think that sometimes, especially during this time where we've migrated a lot of things online, Just before this interview, we're talking about lighting, we're talking about camera angles and things like that, right? But should we worry about that? Should we be concerned about that? I don't think we should be. It might be tempting for us to think, oh, I have to do more. I have to have high production value. Things have to be really clean looking, really sharp looking in order to keep people here. I think maybe that might be something that a lot of us are wrestling with.
Mm,
But just remember that God continues to work. It's not about the production value. It's not about things looking sharp, looking clean. Because if we focus too much on that, we don't have time to focus on just continue to connect with people, continue to minister to them, to pray for them, to point them to passages of scripture, to have opportunities to dive into scripture with them.
mm.
So yeah, I think that would be my word of encouragement. That as we're doing ministry now on screens and devices and things like that, let's not worry too much about that. And let's remember that if anything, this has given us an opportunity to pause because we're not there are a lot of things we don't have to worry about anymore. There's a lot of busyness that's been kind of taken away from us. How do we leverage that now as an opportunity to continue to connect with the people we're ministering to?
Yeah.
And for all of you who are watching who are maybe thinking and worrying, have this burden of oh, I'm not tech savvy, I'm not familiar with a lot of this stuff. Um, it just a phone call, right? A phone
Mm,
call. Everyone can send a text on their phone. Hey, how are you doing? Maybe you can even drive to someone's house if they're willing, and just still practice social distancing and talk to them from as you're standing in the street and they're standing at their door. I mean, there are a lot of other things we can do that don't necessarily require any kind of proficiency in technology. So
oh, that's great. Well, appreciate your time, William. Thank you
yeah,
for some of those thoughts, and definitely, I think you've definitely given us some things to some great reminders, but also some great tips there. So appreciate your time. Thanks.
sure, yep, no problem.